So we want to thank A1 Appliance and Refrigeration Repairs, City Quiet, Windows and Doors, K. Bender Rembam, The Paving Lady, Reserve Advisors, of course. We have Best Roofing. We have Titan Technology Partners, Plastridge Insurance, today's speaker with David Riddle, the Falcon Group, South State Bank, and lastly, the fine folks over at Vote HOA Now. There, now I think I got it all, David. So, with that said, let's turn it over to David Riddle from the Falcon Group. We have an amazing topic today. Sir, take it away.
Alrighty, let's see if I can work on the technology here. All right, Jeff, to share the screen. That does not look like the right screen.
We know exactly what you're doing today. We can see the calendar.
yeah. That's my calendar up.
Oh, and folks, while David's getting the screen up, Keith mentioned the chat appears to be disabled. Yes, the chat is going to say disabled for all of you, but we can still send stuff your way. So you'll still be able to receive the stuff in the chat from us. But let me enable it for in case you do have any technical issues. Keith, thanks for bringing that to my attention because I just contradicted myself by doing that. So chat is now enabled, but again, keep the chat for technical questions only. Looks like David has the slides up. Back to you, sir.
Okay. Mark, thanks, Jeff. Well, that's quite some big shoes to stand up to on the intro there. So again, as Jeff said, I'm David Riddle with the Falcon Group. I'm the director of the West Palm Beach office. The Falcon Group is a national engineering firm. I was just looking this morning, not counting our principals. We have 191 individuals spread across a number of offices, predominantly up and down the East Coast, but we also serve on out west, offices in Denver, Colorado, and San Antonio, Texas. But our headquarters is out of New Jersey. And here in Florida, our primary location is in Miami, Florida, but we also have offices serving other parts of Florida here in West Palm Beach and in Tampa. And we also have a presence in Orlando. So again, before we get started, I just want to reiterate what Jeff has said about the slides. I'm not sure about the echo there.
Nicholas, that might be an issue on your end because I'm 600 miles away from David and he sounds just fine. So it looks like speaker settings on your end, sir. Maybe unstable internet could be. Back to you.
Thank you. All right, so going on again, like Jeff said, at the end of this presentation, you're going to have an opportunity to request the slides. So please reach out if you want a copy of them. And I'll say this also at the end. I'm always available for other questions. If you didn't get a question answered, probably the best way to reach me is by email. And glad to be able to reach out and connect with you if you either run out of time or as always happens to me, as soon as I hang up, I remember 5 questions that I forgot to ask. So if that happens to you today, just, my email is going to be part of these slides. So just reach out to me. So what are we covering today? So reserve studies, capital reserve studies predominantly. So what is the process of getting a reserve study, updating a reserve study? What's included in a reserve study? How do we plan for the reserve study? Purposes and a little bit about different levels. Most important, why do we need a reserve study? Who actually decides the unit is looking at it? But a couple other things in national level, some funding strategies. Probably one that everyone's here for is the House Bill 913 updates, and then finally some closing. And on the last one, as far as the House Bill 913 updates, I want to remind everybody, so this is from the 2025 legislative session. The 2026 legislative session ended just recently, and to my knowledge, there were several bills that were introduced that dealt with reserve studies, but none of them actually passed. So there really were no changes in reserve studies. There were potentially a couple changes in the for condos and HOAs, but none of it involved reserve studies. And so we don't need to talk about that today. We won't be talking about that today, but there were definitely some big changes in House Bill 913 that we need to look at. Process is out of order here. So what is a capital reserve study? For folks like myself that live in a single family home, I have to count on myself to make sure that I have enough money in the bank when my roof needs replaced, or my pool needs refinished, or I need to do something with my driveway, or I need to paint it. But for those living in a communal environment, we have to have the planning out in advance to be able to make sure that that money's in the bank when it comes time to actually do the project, or at the very least, make sure that we don't need to go back and ask owners for a lot more money when those projects are absolutely necessary. So what is the process? So it's kind of the same regardless of whether you've had a report done or this is your first time doing it, which imagine there are a few out there, but probably only a few, or if it's been so long that it basically is your first time doing it. So the first thing that we do is we want to look at documentation. Fortunately, here in Florida, the new buildings tend to be a little bit newer, so we've been blessed with being able to get actual copies of drawings versus where we've done this in some of our other locations. It's tough to find drawings from a building that was built in 1910. So down here, 50s and 60s are getting tough, but usually those drawings are still around. So we start by looking at the drawings, and again, looking at condominiums and HOA. So we look at the governing documents. Was there something in there? Look at any other prior studies that you've done, and then potentially what repairs have you done and maintenance have you done up to this point. So what do we need to focus on? Then we go out on site. We take a look at the common elements and limited common elements, and we'll talk about that in a little bit in the slides. Kind of get an understanding. Then we bring back our photos and the equipment and what the common elements are and the limited common elements. And between our own professional judgment and also some charts that we use between BOMA, which is the Building Operating Managers Association, I believe it is, and a couple other industry organizations that have life cycle tables out there. We take a look at what, for example, you have a domestic water booster pump, and it says that it's supposed to last 20 years. A lot of times field conditions change that kind of stuff. Good maintenance can extend it, bad maintenance can cut it back. But I believe that's a whole presentation for another day that we actually are working on. And then finally, after we have all of that stuff together, then we look at putting together a report so that the board can figure out with the property manager what they need to do. So this is where it's important to understand capital reserves, and I kind of include the structural integrity reserve studies here in Florida underneath this. For the SIRS, we have certain things that absolutely have to be addressed, period. And with a capital reserve, these are kind of the nice to have things. They're renovating the lobbies, redoing the elevator cars, redoing pool furniture. So it's understanding that even within those ranges, even within the SIRS, there's still some flexibility. There's a lot less in the SIRS as far as flexibility, but in the capital reserve, there's a tremendous amount of flexibility. And so the important thing to remember is this report is not your typical engineering report. It is a report that is intended to be a tool for the board to use. And I apologize, my presentation suddenly flipped away. So what are the common elements? What is a common element? And the first thing I always say on these is to review your documents. The documents absolutely talk about what is a common element, what is a little common element. And I might be a little ahead of myself, but what are we trying to do with the reserve study? It serves as a foundation to ensure that money is set aside so that when these projects need to be done, um, when these projects need to be done, there's money in there. And Bob, I will try and see if I can't get a little bit closer to the microphone and let me know if that's better. I will say I'm having some internet issues on this end, so
Sounds good
forgive
to
me
me,
that.
David. This is Jeff. I
Okay,
can hear you just fine. Yeah.
okay. I know I have my here the office just blinked, so sometimes that's an issue. Uh, there we go. Um, so, like I said, I was a little bit ahead of myself. What is a common element? Um, Again, definitely need to look at your documents because the documents control. I can't say that enough. But in general, what we find is common elements: the roofs, elevator, mechanical equipment. The recreational facilities, anything that everybody has free access to. That is what's typically considered a common element. When we get into a little bit more difficulty is the limited common element. This is where it's dedicated to one or more units, but it's not all units. And the one that really has uh, the most pushback, from my experience, is balconies. Again, read your documents. I can't say 100%, but typically your balconies are considered limited common elements. It's the responsibility of the association. We get into fun areas with this when we have tile on the balconies, trying to do restoration projects. Um, so that's where people don't realize that their balcony is actually doesn't belong to them. And so part of, again, this is part of the SIRS typically is doing the structural evaluations and structural restoration work is where we typically see that. But again, some of the other items, windows, et cetera, um, are items that we look at that we need to look at very carefully. This is one that isn't as typical as balconies. Sometimes the association has responsibility for the windows, or that not very often. Sometimes the unit owner has responsibility for the window, but the association has responsibility for the caulking. And then, unfortunately, another one I see quite a bit is it's 100% the owner's responsibility. And so, again, this is some of the stuff where the reserve study is not as straightforward, about taking care of it, especially if you live in a high rise where you need to have a swing stage in order to replace the caulking. Is it something that makes sense to do as part of an association and discharge everybody? But therefore included as part of your capital reserve. Uh, again, somewhat of a board decision, and also definitely something that you would need to talk to council about before you do. Um, but that's, again, some of the considerations of when you're putting together a capital reserve study that you need to think about. And so, again, what's the purpose of the reserve study? Again, to reiterate, it's to make sure that the association has the funds available when it comes time to actually perform that project. And one of the difficult things with any capital reserve, and we'll talk about this a little bit, pretty much everything on that reserve deals with a commodity in one form, fashion, or another. For example, now asphalt, anything dealing with asphalt. So if you have an asphalt roof or paving, we're starting to see cost go up for that. Many years ago, when I was a contractor, we had issues with sheet metal, and the price of steel was insane. And so, literally, when I would give proposals, I would keep them good for like 7 days before I had to update them. And so that's the difficulty with the reserve studies is we don't know what market disruptions may be to happen tomorrow, and we just can't anticipate those. But we can do the best we can, based on history. And so we need to realistically look at it. But on the other hand, as we said, this is a tool. It would be easy just to say, oh, hey, you know what? The replacement costs are 500,000, but we'll bank $1 million. That's not a good way of doing it either. It needs to be a realistic cost based on what we see today and what we're anticipating in the future that those costs may bring. And then, like I said, backing up the useful life. There's a huge difference in useful life, again, for something that's well maintained versus something that's just put there and ignored. Again, beyond the scope of this presentation, but I've been part of a lot of conversations around preventative maintenance. And there's one thought process that the cost of preventative maintenance is more expensive and it's just easier to run it into the ground and simply replace it. I'm not a particular fan of that because it will fail at the worst opportune time usually, but it could be an argument to be made for that. On the other hand, doing the preventative maintenance can tend to extend the life of equipment, and also being proactive and replacing equipment before it fails will also help maintain the quality of the building. This is something that I really don't think most people will use. It's more of a CAI layout, but you'll see, someone says, "Hey, we're going to, propose a level 2 capital reserve study." What they mean is that we're not starting from scratch. Somewhere around, you'll have a reserve study. But we've done some with the level 1, again, where we're beginning anew. And sometimes, the level 1 is also for one that's very old. And I'm sorry, so a couple of questions came in. I'll answer the second one first because it's easy. CAI is, and Jeff, if you're around, maybe help me, community.
Yeah. It's Community Associations Institute. It's a national organization which also contains several regionally based chapters throughout the state of Florida as well as nationwide.
And the important thing about CAI, so CAI for reserve studies is similar to other engineering societies that I'm a part of, or for example, ASTM, the American Society of Testing Materials. So these are standards that we live by. And so I can't just put in whatever I want, kind of a thing, or anticipate handling finances a certain way. One that comes up that's a CAI standard, I get asked all the time is, why do you look at a 30-year outlook? Well, the answer is because CAI standards that we have to live up to says you need to project out 30 years. Now, the realistic, and that actually ties into what we're talking about here with the level 2, we strongly recommend that every 3 to 5 years that you look back at, go over the reserve study. If nothing else, again, commodity prices have changed. Occasionally, it does go the other direction. Steel has definitely gotten cheaper versus when it was in the early 90s when I had that issue. So that's why, again, you want to be proactive, but that's what CAI is. It's, again, like I said, they reference them in the fact that they're promulgate standards that we need. The next question is a good time because we talked about common elements and limited common elements. Are docks within our condo community considered a common element or limited common element? And I'm going to give probably what's a very good attorney answer. It depends. I can't say enough to look at your documents, see what your documents say. It should say in there somewhere. And I've seen it different ways. I've seen literally a totally different association that handles the recreational facilities like docks. I've seen it be part of the overall association. However, only certain owners who purchased the dock in one way or another are allowed to use it, but everyone maintains it, kind of a thing. So I would again look at the condominium documents and what they say to be able to know whether or not it is a common element or limited common element. So we've talked about some of this stuff, and this is where I'm going to go off the screen just a little bit. When the SIRS first started, I had a lot of people and would come up to me and various and sundry marketing events and things like that and say, this is passing fancy. They introduced reserve studies a number of years ago, and it wasn't even a year before they stopped requiring that. So I don't see any issues with that. And you go back through several of my other presentations, or if you've been at some of my live presentations, you'll hear me say, I really don't care what the state of Florida does with reserve studies. Mortgage companies and insurance companies have been awoken to a risk that I think they didn't even know they were taking. Or if they did, they didn't think it was that big of a risk. And unfortunately, with Surfside, they realized that, that we've got a big risk here. Now, this is why it's tough doing these online with my cohort, Andrew from Plastridge Insurance. We're here, and he'd be able to tell you that our insurance market certainly is looking better, and they may not be as forceful to request the capital reserve studies, but they definitely are going to be asking for the SIRS because it's a statutory requirement, and also because that's where their higher risk is. So at least if you fall under the requirements, and this is a little beyond what we're talking about here, but for structural integrity reserve studies, if you are 3 stories or taller, and again, they changed, and I don't think we talked about this in this presentation, but they changed it now away from the Florida Building Code definition, which basically said 3 stories. And if you had a parking garage and 2 stories that counted, that doesn't count anymore. It has to be actual 3 livable levels. But I would make the suggestion that we're starting to see now even 2-story buildings come to us and say, hey, I know we're not required, but can you do a structural integrity reserve study for us to make sure it happens and make sure that things are being taken care of and that we keep the value of our property. So that's kind of, I guess, the first one here. Why are we doing it? The legal and fiduciary requirements, I would say really more regulatory. So again, places like Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, who do a lot of financing, conventional financing out there, they sell into the secondary market. That means that they'll fund the mortgage, but then they sell that mortgage to someone. They usually as a large package to somebody as an investment. And that secondary market requires a certain thing as far as risk. So in order to be able to get the best deal out of it, those organizations are asking to make sure that reserve studies are done, especially the SIRS. The other again part is that the planned replacement and special assessments I think kind of go hand in hand. Nobody wants to be the board that inherited from a board that just deferred things for many years, and now you've got to go back to the owners and say, hey, yeah, we should have been doing this all along, but now we've got to ask you for $1 million because we don't have the money in the bank. So that's again going back to understanding that even the SIRS, to a limited extent, is a tool, a financial tool to be used by the board more than an engineering. So it's again really making sure that you have the money available when the projects are needed. And on the other side, people that are buying into condos are now asking the questions. Hey, I want to see your reserve study. I want to see the milestone as those are appropriate. So they're asking. Prospective buyers are now more aware. 10 years ago, educated buyers would still ask that question. Today, it's really been out there making the news. So more people are aware that it needs to be out there. And then finally, I'm a big believer in preventative maintenance, and part of preventative maintenance is what I would call repair by replacement. So, it's good to keep things up, to refresh and recur. It's always nice, makes a more living environment. So one of the questions that came up, James was saying now required for contracts, and not to put you on the spot, James, what are you referring to the requirement to have all of the contracts up on the website? Is that what you're referring to? And if so, that is true, that there has to be a lot more transparency now as well. That, and I forget the numbers, and again refer to legal counsel, but you are having, as a board, having to okay, yes, okay, that yes, the condominium. So James was referring to the condo addendum, between the Florida Bar and the Association of Realtors. They do have the standard form contracts, and that is part of the requirement now. So it's getting attention. It's not something that's going to be able to slide by. So yeah, James, thank you for that comment and bringing that, because that is important to understand that it's not something you can ignore now. Um, while this is an interesting slide, I think it's a little deceiving. Um, the blue states, which is, let's see, a fair portion, including Florida, has requirements for reserve studies. Florida has more of the structural integrity reserve studies. The more the East Coast, New Jersey, those areas have requirements, but they aren't necessarily, they're guidance, but not necessarily totally required. There's a lot of flexibility in those. Florida's a little bit more pushed down. But if you look at the map, you can see the areas that are heavy intense in condominiums, HOAs tend to have the reserve requirements. States that are less populated, for example, Ohio, Illinois are two that I'm very familiar with. Not as many high-rise condominiums in downtown Columbus, Ohio, versus West Palm Beach, even. So it's a little deceiving. Their requirements aren't quite the same. And then, as you might imagine, get out to Idaho, a great state that I lived in for about 4 years. Don't think I recalled seeing any high-rise condominiums. I will admit it was in the early 90s or late 80s. But in that time frame, they certainly didn't have any high-rise condominiums in Boise, Idaho. So not surprising that they don't have as much driven. But I think that the purpose of this map is to kind of understand that this is not just a Florida thing. Other states are starting to focus on this as well. A couple, this we'll be able to digress a bit on this one. So let me address the slide first, and then address some issues with the slide. So there's two different ways of funding reserve studies. And I apologize, I'm just looking at a question, and Susan, I'll come back. Let me finish the slide. I'll come back to your question. So there's two different ways of doing funding within reserves. First is a straight line. And a straight line is also known as an item or component method. So, for example, roofing. I have a line item for roofing, and I have a certain amount that I reserve for that. Under straight line, I can only spend that money for roofing. If I don't have enough money in the reserve for on that line item to replace the roof or do damage repair, I have to go back to the owners for a special assessment. You think, wow, that's pretty limiting. Why would I want to do that? Well, believe it or not, and I'm sure that the folks out here have a hard time believing this, but occasionally boards can go rogue and will spend money on things that they really shouldn't spend money on. I think it's less today. But I think, some of the changes that have happened in the legislature, I think they're more concerned about that. So that's the idea behind the straight line funding, is that it kind of handcuffs future boards. The other way, and this is the way that I see more boards doing it, is to do a pooled method. So maybe I don't have enough on the line item for roofing, but in my overall reserve study, I got enough money to be able to accomplish the project without going back to the owners for special assessment. Then I can go ahead and use the money out of that pooled reserve to complete the project and then start building it up in the future years. And so a couple important things to remember here. Again, in Florida, you have to separate your structural integrity reserve study from your capital reserve study. And so you can pool within your SIRS and you can pool within your capital reserve study, but you can't pool between the two. The two have to be kept completely separate. There's no, just no mixing of those funds. And you probably think about that, why, when you think about where the SIRS came from. But you can pool, like I said, you can pool within them. Now, the question that's come up, and this is getting less and less because the vast majority of associations out there have already had to do the SIRS. And that's where, how do you split up an existing capital reserve study that includes things like roofing, restoration, but it also includes things like lobbies and recreational facilities. And there's no real guidance from the state on that. I've seen everything from associations that say the SIRS is mandatory. We're going to start all over again from the capital reserve and throw it all 100% in there. I've seen others take a more measured approach where they say, hey, roofing is X percentage of our reserve. We're going to take that percentage, and that's what we're going to put in the structural integrity reserve studies. And then I've seen, the majority of people kind of do a business analysis between the two to figure out what's the best way. But the difficulty is as this article was pointing out, it's a one-way door. Once you move the funds from your overall capital reserve into the SIRS, there's no going back and taking it from the SIRS to move it back into the capital reserve. So if you're in that situation, that's something you definitely want to get guidance of not only your engineering staff, but council to figure out what's really the best way of distributing the existing funds amongst the two reserves. So Susan, to get to your question, the question is, in a well-maintained building in Florida, does the board have the flexibility to postpone an item beyond the useful life data identified within the reserves? And this is a tough one, and I hate to keep coming back to it and say talk to council. More importantly, talk to your engineer. I know that for my team, yes, it says 10 years, but that's part of that evaluation and going out and looking at it to say, in 2 years from now, 3 years from now, 4 years from now, to look at it and say, yeah, you know what? Understand based on the calendar, you need to start preparing for a restoration project. But based on your maintenance, it's my professional opinion, you can wait a couple more years. That gives the board cover. I can say absolutely, if the board does something like that, it's doable. Where you have to get into discussions with council, if you go against what your engineer says, you're probably crossing into some lines that you don't want to cross into in regards to board liability. But most good engineers will work with you to reevaluate, and it might be that you'll need to do the SIRS again and evaluation with the SIRS. But good question, because that is difficult. It kind of points out again, the importance of picking the right engineering firm or right reserve specialist to do the SIRS and evaluations. We've done hundreds, if not thousands, of restoration projects as a company. We know what buildings look like when we take them apart. And so we feel a lot more comfortable. And for me, and the Miami team, a lot of the people that are going out there doing the SIRS are some of the same inspectors that we have on the day-to-day job of doing a restoration. Whereas someone that may not do as much may want to be a little more conservative in their approach and be a little more fixed in their position that something needs to be done. And so that's kind of how, if I were sending a board, how I would address it. I would definitely interview my engineers to kind of get their feel for how they would approach a situation. You want a little bit, what this is the cover sheet for a sample reserve study. What we do is we typically have an executive summary. So that way it's, an executive summary consists of just that you have X number of items out there. They're worth this amount of money, and you need to put, this much away if you go to a 0%, this much away if you want to have a little bit of a cushion, this much if it's a straight line, this much if it's pooled. And then we get down into more of the details that support that, the condition assessments, evaluations, and things along those lines. And so again, very typical, the chart off on the left there, that's very typical summary that we'll have, beginning balances, how much you anticipate putting in and what we anticipate spending during the year. Going back to what we talked about earlier, reserve studies are full of, absolutely full of assumptions and commodities. And again, if I could project out the cost of commodities even 10 years from now, probably wouldn't be giving this presentation to y'all because I'd be on my own island somewhere. So it's tough to predict those. And that's why it's, again, good to every few years update them, just based on what's there. And also at times you can have a damage that's out there that happened in between times after you have your reserve that's not necessarily urgent to fix, but I'm sorry, emergent to fix, but it's urgent to fix. That changes the time frame. And again, sometimes, especially when you do a lot of major work on it, if you've done a restoration project, you replaced the roof, your pool deck's done, you've got stuff on your parking garage. After you've completed all of that, might be a really good time to revisit the structural integrity reserve study and capital reserve studies to make sure that you're not collecting too much. Because as I said in the beginning, you want to make sure there's enough there, but you also want to make sure that you're not over collecting from your owners. And so John asked the question, why can't you reserve for insurance? I will tell you, I don't know if they can do it or not. And I'll again leave that to some of the counsel that we have on there. But I will tell you that I have actually seen smaller associations that want to do that. And again, I'm not an attorney. Well, I am an attorney, but I can't give an opinion in this setting on this. But I will tell you that their counsel said that they could reserve for insurance and be able to use that as part, at least they reserve for the insurance deductible is what they did. And again, how they did that, I really don't know. But like I said, I know that they did, and I'm sure that they got some kind of a opinion letter from their attorney, and I don't know, not to give them work, but I probably could find out who they are. So what did House Bill 913 do? And we won't cover this in this one, but there are also important things within House Bill 913 that, again, is outside of engineering, but affects a number of the people that are on this call. There are some things that changed in regards to voting, in regards to how documents are put out there. So if you're a property manager, those are some things you need to take a look at as well. But for board members, a couple big things that were more happened that came out of 913. The first big one is the alternative funding. Alternative funding had been around for a while. However, I think there was probably one condo association in all of Florida that actually qualified for it. So they made some changes, but I'm not sure it was entirely for the better. So they said that, now you can reserve by special assessment, which you always have had, but also lines of credit and loans. And again, I will leave it to the bankers among us. South Bank here, I know that they can definitely answer some of these questions, but some of the difficulty we have is most banks don't want to lend on a project that's 3 years out. And the same thing, kind of with the line of credits. You can get some line of credits. I've seen associations do that even prior to the statute allowing it, but we won't go there because that's what they needed to do. It's the way they had the ability to make sure that they were fully funded. So it's provided some relief. So I think that there's some. And again, I would talk to your banker to see if they can help if you're needing that, because again, we recognize that there's reality. When you're trying to jump someone's maintenance fees, 100%, we're going to lose some owners that have been with us for a long time. So we really need to look at some alternative. And the pooled funding, while DBPR, when SIRS first came out, said, yes, you could pool within the SIRS. It was really kind of a technical interpretation. House Bill 913 made it very clear now that said, yes, you can pull the SIRS. So it was really more of a clarification than a change in practice. And the other big thing was that if you invest in certain investment vehicles, that the board can invest without a unit owner vote to be able to do that investment. The other as well that they did, there's what we call a catch-all to the little G items that said, anything greater than $10,000 that affected all of the above items. So not entirely certain what that was, and we're still working on getting guidance, but the other items fortunately now jumped up to $25,000. And not only was it $25,000, but this is also now going to be ratcheted to inflation, so that's going to increase each year. So DBPR, Division of Condos through DBPR, will be putting out those numbers now for ongoing forward. So a couple comments, and Jeff, I don't know if the question and the answers are visible to everybody, but just in case they aren't, Paul, you have a good point that there is no useful life or predictable cost for insurance, and you hit the nail exactly on the head. That was a difficult thing that I said to him was, how long do you want to reserve for this? Again, like commodities, if I could predict hurricanes and when you're going to need it, man, I probably wouldn't be doing this. But so I don't know. Can the participants see the questions?
No, they can see them if we type an answer. So
Okay.
until we address them, but David, along those lines, even the easier stuff to budget for is nothing more than a best guess. I mean, anything can go up or down like that. So
Yes.
anyway, back to you, sir.
Yeah. And Jeff, you bring a point that can't say enough. That's why it's important to keep these updated. And things change against it's commodities. It's commodity based, and especially here in South Florida, labor as well is commodity based. So we need to. The more current you stay, the more likely you are to be able to keep a um, good handle on what you need. And John made the comment that he knows of one condo that special assessors charges, so they can deduct from capital gains when they're selling their unit. Creative. I don't know if it's illegal or not, but it's certainly creative, and again, probably a little bit beyond what I'm able to give an opinion on in this type of presentation.
Yeah, at the risk of sounding like a law firm salesperson, forgive me if I do. When you're not sure, managers included, I don't care if you have 40 years of managerial experience, don't pretend to be a lawyer. Always consult with your association counsel when you're not sure about these things.
Yeah, and Jeff, I would say even more important to that, I am actually an attorney here in the state of Florida, and my specialty when I practiced was construction law, but now I'm on a little different side of that, and even I when I get asked these questions, sometimes even the softball stuff that I really know the answer to, I don't keep up with it day to day. I get the bar journal. I'm a member of the bar. I see some stuff that's going on, but man, KBR, you need to keep up with, that's what they do every day, day in, day out. And, that sometimes there's this obscure case law. To give a good example, in the construction side, unfortunately, it was a case I was personally involved with. Now in the state of Florida, a couple of years ago, it was questionable as far as defects and when the damages were calculated. That now came out that it's at the time of the defects or at the time of construction. I learned about that update the hard way. Fortunately, I was actually in trial when that update happened, but unfortunately, it impacted the case that I was involved with. So, law firms again like KBR, that's what they do. They keep up with their stuff. So, Frank, I'm not sure where are you asked about, do the reserves have to be 100%? Capital reserves have to be fully funded. The capital reserves don't, because again, a lot of the capital reserves, it's very much there's a lot of optional items in there.
Right, a
And
board
so,
decision, new builds. It's not replacing. The capital
yes,
typically is new stuff, correct?
yeah, and it's replacing things like, again, hey, we want to update the lobby. We want to replace, and the one that I use all of the time that threw me when I first started doing capital reserve studies, pool furniture.
Yeah,
I knew it was expensive, but I didn't realize exactly how expensive. And so, the first time I did that, the association came back and said, "Hey, you don't have the pool
yeah,
furniture on." I'm like, "Pool furniture, man? Don't you just replace it, as needed?" And they're like, "No, the pool furniture manufacturers they change their structure every year. So
yeah,
when you buy a chair this year, you can't buy the same chair next year, and we don't want it to mismatch because we're
right,
hiring a nice condo, that kind of stuff. I understand that,
right.
and so we have to replace everything, and that could be $100,000 for even
Oh
a
my God, yeah,
relatively small pool.
it really could
So
be. Yeah, David, I think the thing for a lot of folks on this call, on this class today to remember are expectations versus requirements, two different things. And a lot of your, I don't want to say all of them, but a lot of your reserves fall into, tend to fall into the things that are required, while a lot of the capital things fall into lifestyle expectations. Not again, not all of them, but it's just something to keep in mind is what's required versus what is expected in your lifestyle.
yes, exactly, and that's a good way of thinking about it, Jeff. Is that capital reserve is kind of the nice to have, whereas the SIRS are things that if you don't pay attention to them, the building's either going to fall down or there's going to be some life safety impact.
Yeah, which we unfortunately went through in a big way a few years ago.
Yes, unfortunately, and so
Um,
that's definitely still out there. Although, again, subject for another great continuing education course. I expect it to be out there shortly.
yeah,
The NTSB, I'm sure, is getting very close to their final report. The very last one that I found, ironically enough, probably shouldn't say this on one that I'm trying to pitch, making sure you get your reserves done. But they actually found that the reserves probably were the smaller part of what happened, and it was the underdesigned and underbuilt that were the two bigger issues. But make no mistake, lack of maintenance was still an issue there. So, and again, if you could have evaluated everything, we would have been able to be able to, they would have been able to catch it earlier. We could have
Yeah.
reinforced things. We've done carbon fiber reinforcements before when we found that construction wasn't quite right.
Yeah.
Not inexpensive, but we've saved buildings by doing that.
Absolutely.
So
And folks, David's not done yet. He's getting there. But just so you do know, folks, we placed the link for the required evaluation in the chat, so it is there now. We'll do it again in a few minutes. So if you haven't already pressed the chat button, please do so right now. David, back to you.
and Jeff, actually, I think this is my last slide other
Oh,
than
was it? Okay.
questions. So again, saying, again, if I think some things to take away from this is to understand regular updates are important
Hmm.
because the prices change. Professional expertise matters because again, this is as an engineer, I approach things as an engineer, and a lot of engineers haven't been in the shoes that I've been in. Money matters. Money absolutely matters. Safety matters as well, but there's a gray area between those two things that is really important to understand how your reserve person putting your reserves together is going to interpret those things. And finally, understanding, as we've seen, economic conditions can change. I've been around for, I'm starting almost my fourth decade in this industry, and
David
I've
and I,
seen
we each
massive
started
change.
when we were 10, by the way. But anyway, back to you.
Yes. All right. And Jeff, I see I have one more question there, but I'm not sure I understand funding. What funding requirements does the new 718.112 require for SIRS? Not sure I understand the question, but I know it's still really, you know, SIRS funding is required. And again, the anticipation that you have to have a fully funded SIRS to meet the statutory requirements. And there's still some time frames left. Although I would suspect that just about most buildings, or at least quite a few of the buildings, are already required to do the SIRS. So again, if you're one of those lucky ones that you're not quite at 30 years yet, um, you don't have to do the milestones, but pretty much, I believe every high rise condominium in Florida now falls under the SIRS requirement.
And Marielle has joined us. Welcome, Marielle. I know she had a couple of pre-submitted questions that came through via chat or text or email for David. And David, if they are repetitive, please forgive us ahead of time. Marielle, you have a couple of them there?
Yes, I actually have a bit of a long one. I'll read it out loud, and I'm going to just, for privacy, I'm going to not say the condo in which we're discussing, but hi, I'm the chairman of the maintenance committee for said condo, which just turned 25 years old. The board in 2024, when faced with a dramatic increase in insurance costs, changed our budget, extending the useful life of our exterior coating from 10 years to 17 years, moving beyond the then current budget consideration. The SIRS was not changed from the earlier determination requiring funding in 2027. The sealing and painting of exterior EIFS cladding is more than $400K. Can we avoid funding it based on our earlier decision? The DBPR has told me it must be funded or new SIRS needs to give us the later date. I'm going to put this in the chat so you can refer to it because it's quite a long.
Okay, if you could jump in the chat, then there was one that came in. I'll answer it real fast because it's a quick question.
Okay.
So the question came in: Are commercial condos required to have the SIRS report done? To my knowledge, that is, apparently commercial condos are smart enough to know to keep themselves in good shape, and so SIRS are not required. Now, so that there's no confusion, sometimes SIRS and milestones get configured together. Those are very different things. For certain municipalities, certain authorities having jurisdictions, for example, one that readily comes to my mind is pretty much all of Miami-Dade and all of Broward County. If the commercial condo is large enough to be a threshold, they have to have the equivalent of a milestone done. Here in Palm Beach, There's Boca, Boynton are two that I believe require commercial condos as well. But the SIRS report, the reserve studies, and at this stage is just limited to residential.
And just reminding everybody to place your course-related questions into the Q&A module, not into the chat module. David and Marielle are ignoring the chat for course questions. The chat should be for the evaluation and any technical issues you might be having, which I can answer. Back to you guys.
Yes, and I did just reiterate to you, David, a couple of just privately a couple of these questions so you can read them, because especially that first one was a bit lengthy. And then there was another question that came in, which is more straightforward, which is, what is the difference between a milestone inspection report and the 40 or 50 recert report?
So that was actually relatively straightforward.
Yeah.
Broward County, Miami-Dade, and a lot of the municipalities there have pretty much said if you do our 30 years, we will accept that as the milestone. And so effectively, and they're all pretty much 30-year now. They're not 40 or 50-year anymore. But again, just like the milestone, every 10 years you have to have them done. So it's basically not basically it is the same. So if you've done the milestone, if you've done the, for example, I just finished up a Broward County building safety inspection report. If you have that, that meets the requirements for the milestone report. I see someone commented about the new the other items being increased to 25,675 with a 2.7% CPI increase. I can't confirm that, but that sounds about right. And actually, you've added me one more thing to do on my to-do list today to go check the DBPR website to see if they have updated that yet. But they're supposed to publish that when that comes out. But that does sound about in the right neighborhood. And Mary, I haven't seen the other longer question that you were going to drop in there.
Okay, I'll reshare that one. Let me just reshare it here directly. Should have been.
And David, would Marielle share? She's sharing it in the chat just for us to see.
Oh, share in the chat. Okay, let me
Yes.
jump to the chat.
Sorry, that's just so you can see it directly. Yes.
Yeah,
Sorry, not in the question.
The attendees are going into the Q&A, but the three of us communicate via chat so it doesn't get confused.
This is the one that I had read out loud. It's a little bit lengthy. I don't know. It starts with the board in 2024 when faced with a dramatic
yes, I got it.
insurance cost.
Yes.
And they were saying this is a 25-year-old community.
Again, this is where I go back to, I will defer to the attorneys in regards to what it could be. Without getting into a lot of details, I could see where the board could do that, but I would suggest that they would open themselves up to some potential liability if they did that. But again, I can't strongly enough to say you need to refer to counsel to that to understand what risk you are taking by doing that, because it's a little bit more of a non-engineering question. But how we handle that from the engineering side, I've done this as well, where we've talked to associations and they're like, this is crazy. The engineer says that I have to replace it tomorrow, and I know better than that. It's decent. And I go out and look and I'm like, yeah, I don't understand this either. This really should be 10 years from now, kind of a thing. The safest bet for the board in regards to liability is to just have that SIRS updated, because then they can point to it and say, hey, we're not the expert. This engineer was, and they said we're okay. And so that's, unfortunately, I know probably not the answer they want to hear, but unfortunately, that's probably the safer approach.
Yeah, and we many of you guys know we have a great partnership with KBR, so please reach out to them. You guys can find them through our website, acebytsk.com, to talk about these more intricate case scenario circumstances where we're referring to like board docs and stuff like that. Yeah.
Okay, so I see one again question. I know that we're running. I want to respect everybody's time, but I'll take this one last question
Appreciate it.
that was
Yeah.
asked. Someone said, we did our 50-year certification in 2020. Can we use that as the current milestone inspection? Um, I would suggest that again, the authority having jurisdiction would be the one to answer that question. But I would suggest that if you haven't received notice from them and aren't appearing before a magistrate at this point, they have probably accepted that as the milestone requirement to be able to handle that. And then, if you did it in 2020, believe it or not, unfortunately, you're probably nearing the point, at least within the next 2 years, that you're going to want to start at least looking at pre-inspection evaluations to make sure that in 2030, when you get that notice, that you pass.
Okay. Excellent. And I know David shared, I believe on that last slide, your information, right? Was your email on that slide?
You know what? It looks like Mark did not put my email on
That's
that.
okay.
It's okay. But folks, after you submit the evaluation and all, the Falcon Group's website, the email to receive communication and request the slides will be on the confirmation of a submission page. So you fill out the evaluation with the link in the chat. After you fill that sucker out, the screen after that has everything you need, as well as the email address to contact anybody over at the wonderful folks at Falcon Group and request the slides.
Amazing, Jeff. You're the best. We appreciate that. Um, all right. And then just once more, Jeff has placed the evaluation link again into the chat. So if you guys didn't see it, you can refer back to it there. Make sure to fill that out so you can receive the appropriate credit. Um, yeah, I think we got to most, if not all the questions, including some of the pre-submitted ones. So we appreciate you guys so much for spending your morning with us. We hope you have a wonderful, wonderful afternoon. David, you've graciously given us so much great information, but also answered questions. And we appreciate you making yourself available for people to continue asking those tough questions and, being a resource and our trusted expert. So thank you.
Thank you. All right. Thanks, everyone.